So I recently went through something I wouldn't wish on anyone. You spend your whole life working for peace, saving for a dream, believing that once you find the right place, the world will finally quiet down. But what would you do if one morning you woke to the smell of burning asphalt and realized your very road, the one you paid for, the one you owned, had been stolen in the dead of night? That's where my story begins, not with some neighborly disagreement, not with a petty letter about mailbox colors, but with the sound of diesel engines and the sting of betrayal that clung to the air like smoke. I remember that morning vividly. The kitchen smelled of Alina's coffee, a routine that always grounded me. But that day, something else drifted in through the open window, acrid, sharp, unmistakable. Asphalt. I stepped outside, mug still in hand, and my heart dropped straight into my boots. The gravel driveway I had built, my private access, my $80,000 investment in freedom from HOA control, was gone. Paved over, glossy black tar where my rustic stone had been. My fence posts were toppled like broken teeth, the survey markers smashed into twisted metal. It wasn't an accident, it was invasion. And then I found the letter, folded neat, taped to one of those brand new stone pillars that now declared in bold brass letters, Willowbrook Commons Grand Entrance. The arrogance of it nearly stole my breath. In her perfect script, the HOA president, Vivian Ashworth, demanded $3,200 for community upgrades and warned me of monthly fees if I wanted continued access. My land, my road, my name nowhere in their books. People say some villains wear masks. Vivian wore a real estate agent's smile, sharp enough to cut glass. I knew of her, of course. Everyone did. The woman treated neighborhood rules like holy scripture, quoting bylaws like they were verses, fining families over bird feeders and grass length. She was notorious. But this was war. What she didn't know, what she couldn't have guessed, is that I wasn't some rookie homeowner fumbling through paperwork. I was Garrett Rockwell, retired commercial developer. I'd built more roads than she had ever driven on. And I still had contacts, favors, and a card she would regret forcing me to play. That first night, I didn't sleep. I sat in my office, maps and deeds scattered across the desk, replaying every detail of my land purchase. Old rancher George Blackwood had sold me the access road separately. It wasn't part of Willowbrook. It was mine, carved out back in the 80s specifically to avoid HOA interference. I had the documents notarized, sealed, filed in county records. Still, Vivian had bulldozed through, convinced intimidation would get her what she wanted. Alina tried to calm me, her voice steady but eyes full of worry. Garrett, maybe it's a mistake. But we both knew there are no mistakes when heavy machinery shows up at dawn. There's only intent. Sophia, my daughter, just 15 then, peeked out her window and asked the question that burned deeper than Vivian's asphalt. Dad, can they just take it? That's the moment I realized what this fight was about. Not roads, not fees, not property values, but dignity. Family. The promise that when you sacrifice, when you pay your dues and fight your battles, no one should be able to waltz in and strip you of it overnight. I clenched that letter, the words community standards smirking at me from the page, and I made a promise, not just to my family, but to myself. She thought she'd won. She thought she'd paved over my freedom. But by morning, Vivian Ashworth and her little HOA mafia would learn what it means when you push the wrong man too far. Because what she didn't know, what no one knew, was that I had a secret weapon. A towing contract with every impound lot in the county. And before dawn broke, not a single car registered to her board members would remain in Willowbrook. By sunrise, their driveways sat empty, the cul-de-sacs hollow and echoing. Neighbors rubbed their eyes, staring at streets stripped bare, whispers of confusion spreading like wildfire. Vivian thought she was untouchable. But now, with her precious committee's cars vanished into thin air, she was about to learn the one truth every bully eventually faces. Karma doesn't knock, it tows. Everyone woke up confused that morning, but no one more than Vivian. She strutted out of her white BMW like she owned the subdivision, only this time the BMW wasn't there. Her driveway was bare. So were the board members. And as neighbors peeked through curtains, a wave of whispers rolled down Willowbrook Commons like a storm cloud. Where did all the cars go? Vivian's face said everything. Rage, disbelief, panic she tried to disguise with clipped phone calls and sharp gestures. But panic doesn't stay hidden for long. Especially not when your entire HOA council suddenly has to explain to their families why their cars have vanished into thin air overnight. Some call it revenge, I call it balance. Because when someone paves over your property at dawn, they don't expect consequences before breakfast. That's where they were wrong. Still, I knew this wasn't over. Taking their cars was just a wake-up call. The real fight was still ahead. And I felt it in my bones. Vivian wasn't the kind of woman to lick her wounds quietly. By mid-morning, the retaliation began. The HOA's group email thread lit up with accusations about community theft and criminal sabotage. Vivian drafted a letter so dramatic it could have been read in Congress. Words like public safety, negligence, danger to children were scattered like grenades. But here what burned me most. She didn't just accuse me of refusing to cooperate. She called me a threat to the neighborhood, a danger. And she spread that lie with the same confidence she used to measure grass with her ridiculous little ruler. Alina came home from the grocery store that day shaken. 3 neighbors had cornered her near the produce aisle, whispering warnings about my legal troubles. She unpacked the bags with trembling hands, the smell of her lavender shampoo barely masking the sweat of stress. "They made it sound like you're some kind of criminal," she whispered, her voice breaking. And Sophia, she shut her curtains. Our 15-year-old, who once loved staring at the mockingbirds outside, closed herself off because people she'd grown up around were suddenly treating her like an outcast. "It's like living in a fishbowl," she said, and she wasn't wrong. Neighbors slowed their walks, phones in hand, snapping pictures, pointing at our garden, whispering. It wasn't just harassment, it was humiliation. That's when I realized Vivian's game wasn't simply about property lines. It was about control, fear. Break a family's spirit and you can own their land long before the ink ever dries. But she underestimated something. My patience, my memory, and my allies. Because Vivian didn't know George Blackwood, the rancher who sold me the road, had prepared for people exactly like her. Buried in the deeds were clauses, old-fashioned but ironclad, ensuring no HOA could ever claim my access. She thought she'd paved over a weakness. What she'd really done was light a fuse. And while she sent out her letters, while her supporters strutted past our house like unpaid paparazzi, I was digging deeper. I called Dustin, my old business partner turned traffic engineer, and ordered a fresh land survey. State-of-the-art GPS, unshakable coordinates. The cost, exactly $3,200, the same figure Vivian had billed me for destroying my driveway. Poetic justice stamped in ink. But that wasn't all. Rex Donovan, a retired sheriff's deputy with a nose for buried records, owed me a favor. 3 days later, he came back with something Vivian never wanted anyone to know. She'd been quietly buying up land all around us through shell companies. 6 different LLCs, 18 months of secret deals. She wasn't just interested in my road. She wanted everything. My 3 acres were the keystone holding her empire together. Suddenly, it all made sense. The intimidation, the propaganda, the sudden community upgrades. Vivian wasn't running an HOA. She was running a land grab, and I was the last piece on her chessboard. That night, Alina found me in the garage surrounded by deeds, maps, and surveillance footage. She laughed, shaking her head. "You look like a general planning a war." I looked up, dead serious. That's exactly what this is. Because Vivian thought she had power. She thought intimidation could break us. But what she didn't realize is that every photo her supporters snapped, every letter she mailed, every sneaky little move she made was evidence. Evidence of harassment. Evidence of fraud, evidence of a criminal empire hiding behind neighborhood bylaws. And I was documenting it all. Some people fight with fists, some with lawyers. Me, I fight with records, and in the end, records are sharper than any blade. So when Vivian organized her next stunt, a so-called community awareness walk where her entourage paraded past our house, pointing, whispering, photographing like tourists at a zoo, I didn't shout. I didn't argue. I simply filmed every smirk, every staged violation, every step of trespass dressed up as concern. Because I knew, the more desperate she became, the closer she'd come to making the one mistake she couldn't walk away from. Everyone saw it. The bright orange county stop work order fluttering against Vivian's brand new stone entrance pillars like a victory flag in the Texas wind. To me, it was sweeter than Christmas morning. To her, it was gasoline on a fire. She didn't retreat, she doubled down. That Friday night, she called an emergency HOA board meeting. Of course, I wasn't invited, but my neighbor, Marcus Webb, a retired Marine with a talent for evening dog walks and an ear sharp enough to pick up whispers through brick walls, just happened to be passing by. Later, he told me what he heard inside. Vivian ranting for an hour about how I was obstructing community progress, how I was tanking property values, how I was the lone, selfish holdout. Her voice, Marcus said, cracked with desperation. And then the board voted unanimously. Fine Garrett Rockwell $500 per day for failure to maintain common area. Think about that. They were fining me not for breaking rules, not for damaging their property, but for refusing to maintain my own private road according to their standards. When the certified letter arrived Monday morning, even the post office clerk looked embarrassed handing it over. Elena read it once, her jaw tightening. Then she slammed a cabinet so hard in the kitchen I thought the door might snap clean off. Sophia, meanwhile, sat silent at the table, her homework untouched. She was 15. She should have been worried about prom dresses and SAT prep. Instead, she was watching her parents get cornered like animals by people who called themselves neighbors. But Vivian wasn't finished. She moved from paper warfare to psychological. By midweek, groups of 8 or 10 supporters strolled past our home daily in what she called beautification walks. They carried phones, snapping pictures, pointing at Alina's garden, whispering behind manicured hands. The sound of mockingbirds, the reason we'd moved here, was replaced by the steady click, click, click of camera shutters. Sophia shut her curtains for good that week. "It's like living in a fishbowl," she muttered, pulling the blinds down tight. I could see the hurt in her eyes, that teenage fear of being mocked, judged, excluded. And it broke me in ways Vivian could never understand. Because property lines, you can rebuild those, but a child's sense of safety, once it's cracked, it never goes back the same. I tried to keep my voice steady for Alina's sake, but inside I was boiling. And Vivian, she seemed to thrive on it. Her clipboard became an extension of her arm, documenting infractions as though our home were some kind of crime scene. The posts started popping up online. Photos of our mailbox with captions like "interesting choice," "wonder if it's regulation," or Alina's garden gnomes with passive-aggressive comments about fire safety. It was petty, it was humiliating. But worst of all, it was strategic. Vivian wasn't just harassing me. She was poisoning the community against us, turning friendly faces into suspicious eyes, isolating us from allies before the real strike. But here, where she miscalculated. She thought intimidation would push me into retreat. What she didn't realize was that every petty act, every fake violation, every whispered lie, I was stacking them like bricks in a wall. Evidence. A wall high enough to bury her under when the time came. And the cracks in her empire were already starting to show. That same week, Rex, the retired sheriff's deputy I'd hired to dig into her records, dropped a bomb on my desk. 6 different shell companies, 18 months of property acquisitions. Vivian wasn't protecting community standards. She was building a private land empire, and my 3 acres, they were the keystone. Without me, her puzzle was worthless. With me, she could flip the subdivision into luxury estates and pocket millions. I remember the taste in my mouth when I realized it, metallic, bitter, like chewing a coin. She wasn't just power-hungry. She was desperate, and desperate people make mistakes. That Friday, a letter arrived from a law firm I knew all too well, Petton and Associates. Ironically, they were the same lawyers who'd handled the sale of my construction business years earlier. They knew my accounts. They knew I had money, which made the threat inside their envelope all the bolder. A $50,000 lawsuit for destruction of community property. Their evidence, my land survey stakes on my own land. I laughed at the absurdity, but deep down I knew what they were doing. It wasn't about winning in court. It was about draining me. Exhaust me with fees, tangle me in red tape, bury me under paperwork until I'd give in. That night, Alina found me in the garage, papers spread across the workbench, strings connecting deeds, surveys, photos. She laughed softly. "You look like a general planning a campaign." I didn't even look up. Funny you should say that, because that's exactly what this is. She grew quiet then, watching me highlight clauses George Blackwood had written into the deed decades ago. The old rancher had been wily, preparing for a fight he wouldn't live to see. And now his words were my shield, in perpetuity, not subject to HOA covenants. Forever. I traced the letters with my finger, my jaw set. Vivian thought this was about road access, about fees, about control. But this wasn't a neighborhood dispute anymore. This was war. The first sign of sabotage came with the smell of dying grass. Not just any grass, Alina's St. Augustine, lush and emerald, the pride of her weekends. Overnight it had wilted, brown patches spreading like infection. The roses, too, shriveling under a brutal Texas sun. I traced the irrigation lines and found the cut, precise, surgical. Someone had slashed the main water feed beneath the fresh asphalt. Before I could call a plumber, the phone rang. Vivian. Her voice dripped with that syrupy, false concern she saved for real estate clients. Mr. Rockwell, I hear you're planning to damage community infrastructure. Any alterations will require board approval and a $5,000 deposit. I nearly laughed. She sabotaged my line, then tried to sell me back my own water. It was like being mugged at gunpoint and offered a receipt. But it didn't stop there. The law firm struck again, filing a preliminary injunction demanding I remove my survey stakes and private property signs. They claimed they were harassment of HOA members. It was a tactic I'd seen before during my contractor years. Tie your opponent in lawsuits until they bleed out financially. Not designed to win, designed to exhaust. And I'll admit some nights it worked. I'd lie awake, Alina's breathing steady beside me, but my mind spinning with numbers. $50,000 here, $85 a month there, $5,000 deposits. Drip by drip, they were trying to drown me. But then something remarkable happened. The community began to fracture. Marcus, the retired Marine, offered to set up security cameras on my land. Dr. Hernandez, a quiet woman I'd only waved at before, knocked on my door one evening. She carried a folder, her own HOA horror story, full of fines and intimidation. Janet, a schoolteacher with the kind of organizational skills you trust to launch a rocket, revealed Vivian had tried to lowball her property for half its worth. When she refused, her garbage pickup mysteriously stopped. It wasn't just me. Vivian was running a systematic campaign against anyone who stood in her way. And slowly, the pieces of her puzzle were coming together. Then came the tax bomb. The county reappraised my property, citing road improvements. My annual taxes jumped from $4,200 to $7,800. And here's the cruel part. In order to appeal, I had to pay the full amount up front. Another squeeze, another trap. That evening, Alina and I sat on the porch watching the sunset blur behind a haze of diesel exhaust and teenage skateboards grinding against my stolen asphalt. She sighed, her hand curling around mine. "She's getting desperate," she said. "Good," I muttered, texting Rex for an update. "Desperate people make stupid mistakes." And she did. The county clerk's office, suddenly staffed with a young woman who looked suspiciously like Vivian's niece, lost my original survey documents. She smiled like a cat while telling me I'd need to reapply for an access permit. The fee, $2,800, processing time, 6 to 8 months. Until then, my road access would be questionable. I'd seen shakedowns before, but this was different. This was extortion wrapped in government letterhead. Meanwhile, Rex's investigation painted Vivian in darker shades every day. She wasn't just buying land. She was mortgaging it, borrowing millions against projected HOA income, promising banks she'd expand membership by force. My land was the keystone. Without it, her entire financial empire was a house of cards waiting for a gust of wind. And still, she escalated. One night, Marcus's cameras caught her supporters prowling near midnight, removing my survey markers, dumping construction debris on my property, even harassing Sophia when she checked the mailbox. My 15-year-old daughter, a child, being treated like a criminal by rent-a-cops in golf carts. Alina found me the next morning at the workbench, maps and deeds sprawled across the garage. "You're not sleeping," she whispered. "I'm preparing," I said, not looking up. Because this wasn't about harassment anymore. It wasn't even about money. Vivian wasn't just trying to take my land, she was trying to break my family. And when people try to break what you love, you don't retreat, you build. So I built a war room. The garage transformed into something between a crime lab and a battlefield command center. Maps pinned to walls, timelines stretching across folding tables, deeds and documents hung on lines like evidence in a courtroom drama. Marcus supplied the security expertise. Dr. Hernandez brought legal precedents and medical documentation of stress. Janet color-coded folders with the efficiency of the Pentagon. And Rex, he unearthed the smoking gun. Vivian's shell companies weren't just failing. They were hemorrhaging. $340,000 in unpaid loans, credit cards maxed, her real estate license under investigation. She was 90 days from collapse. That explained the desperation, the sabotage, the endless intimidation. She wasn't fighting for control, she was fighting for survival. And here's the cruelest truth. Desperation doesn't make people back down, it makes them dangerous. As I sat in that garage, Alina's hand warm on my shoulder, I realized something. This wasn't just about protecting what was mine. This was about ending her. Not physically, not violently, but legally, publicly. Because a bully thrives in silence, but once exposed, they crumble. Vivian thought she was the one playing chess, but she had no idea she was already in checkmate. Everyone thought it was a mediation session. That was Vivian's genius. She could package hostility in wrapping paper labeled community. The invitation arrived on county letterhead, stamped informal meeting. I should have known. In my contractor days, any meeting labeled informal usually meant someone was about to get formally screwed. I walked into that conference room expecting neighbors and compromise. What I found was a corporate ambush. 12 board members, Vivian's attorney, and a presentation folder so thick it could have stopped a bullet. The county commissioners sat stiff as mannequins, looking more like hostages than leaders. Vivian launched into her slideshow, Community Impact Assessment. She spoke of progress, safety, value. Then she slid a folder across the table. Her offer, $15,000 for my road easement. $15,000 for a property worth $80,000. For the road I'd paid for to keep out of her reach. This is a generous offer considering the legal complications your obstruction has created, she purred, perfume heavy enough to choke a horse. I stood, straightened my jacket, and looked her in the eye. I'll consider your offer right after you consider my counterproposal of $0 and a public apology. And then I walked out. That was the moment I stopped playing defense. Vivian's war machine rolled harder the next week. A front-page article hit the local paper. Property dispute divides Willowbrook. Her fingerprints were all over it. She painted herself as the selfless community leader fighting a stubborn holdout. I got one measly paragraph buried on page 2 between a bake sale announcement and a lost dog notice. The aerial photo they printed my house, circled like a blemish, surrounded by shiny new asphalt, was propaganda pure and simple. Online, the comment section turned into a digital lynch mob. Strangers debated my character, my finances, Alina's garden gnomes. And Vivian? She thrived on it. But while she played the media, I was laying bricks on my case. Marcus's cameras captured her crew sneaking in at night, tearing up survey markers, dumping debris, even harassing Sophia and her friends. Imagine a teenage girl just trying to get the mail, carded by some rent-a-cop like she was breaking into her own home. Vivian was building her narrative. I was building my evidence. And the harassment spread beyond property lines. My insurance company suddenly declared my road commercial exposure due to increased traffic, hiking my premium by $4,000. Alina's career was targeted next. A school board member whispered about how her husband's hostile behavior might reflect poorly on her judgment as an educator. That cut deeper than asphalt. Because intimidation against me? Fine, I'd survived worse. But going after Alina's livelihood, threatening Sophia's college future, that was different, that was personal. Alina came home pale, her hands trembling as she set her purse on the counter. "They're trying to ruin my career," she whispered. I looked at her and something in me shifted. Vivian had been playing with fire. Now she'd poured gasoline on herself. Because workplace intimidation isn't just dirty politics. It's federal civil rights law when used to coerce property transactions. She was accidentally writing my lawsuit for me. Meanwhile, Rex kept digging, and what he found in that courthouse basement nearly made me weep with gratitude for the old rancher George Blackwood. His original deed restrictions, yellowed paper, musty with age, spelled it out crystal clear. Access road shall remain private property in perpetuity, not subject to any HOA covenants, assessments, or interference whatsoever. Perpetuity forever, until the stars burn out. George hadn't just sold me a road, he'd handed me a sword. And Vivian had walked right into it. But the deeper Rex dug, the uglier the picture became. Vivian wasn't just corrupt, she was collapsing. Her shell companies owed $2.4 million in development loans collateralized with projected HOA income. Without my road, without expansion, she'd default in 2 months. Bankruptcy wasn't just possible, it was inevitable. That explained everything. The late-night cruise, the sabotage, the endless intimidation. She wasn't expanding, she was drowning, and I was the only life raft she could see. So we built our war room stronger. Maps covered the garage walls. Timelines stretched across folding tables. Marcus brought surveillance gear fit for a forward operating base. Dr. Hernandez compiled legal precedents. Janet organized every file with surgical precision. "This looks like either the most boring movie set ever," Elena said one morning, "or the most interesting garage sale in Texas." I smiled for the first time in weeks. "It's a war room," I said. Because Vivian thought she had me surrounded, but in truth, she was the one boxed in. Our ace in the hole was Catherine Silverman, Dallas's most feared property rights attorney. 94% win rate, reputation for making opposing counsel weep. Her plan was brutal in its elegance: file a quiet title action and a federal environmental complaint the same day as the HOA's public hearing. Shift the burden, expose the fraud. "By the time they realize what hit them," Catherine explained, "they'll be defending criminal charges instead of attacking your driveway." It was the first time I'd felt hope since the asphalt trucks rolled in. That night, Elena pressed her head against my shoulder. "Do you think this will work?" she asked softly. I kissed her hair and whispered, "It doesn't have to work perfectly, it just has to outlast her." Because bullies don't fear strength, they fear exposure. And Vivian, she was about to be exposed. Vivian's desperation reached new artistic heights the night I woke to the rumble of unmarked trucks. Midnight, floodlights blazing, the smell of fresh asphalt and diesel exhaust seeping through our windows. I pulled back the curtain, and there she was, pink tracksuit, clipboard in hand, barking orders like a deranged general at a suburban battlefield. Her crew was installing speed bumps, no parking signs, even repainting lines on what she brazenly called community infrastructure. It was theater, pure intimidation theater. Marcus's cameras caught everything: license plates, faces, Vivian herself waving arms like she was directing traffic at 2 a.m. The footage was comedy gold. Neighbors flicked on their porch lights, watching the HOA president throw her own midnight construction circus. But comedy has sharp edges. Her plan was clear: create permanent modifications, then argue my resistance proved I wasn't a real community member. The next day, she went lower. Elena was loading groceries into her car at school when Vivian appeared, perfume heavy, smile sharp as a scalpel. "Elena, honey," she purred, "I know this has been hard on your family. Why don't we make it easier?" She leaned closer, lowering her voice. $25,000 cash, just for your inconvenience, if Garrett drops this silly lawsuit." Elena, bless her heart, hit record on her phone before Vivian even finished. What she captured? Gold. Vivian confessing that the cash was coming from the Community Improvement Fund. Money Rex had already proven was embezzled from dues. She was literally offering to bribe us with stolen money while confessing to financial crimes on camera. "Think about Sophia's college fund," Vivian pressed, her voice syrupy with false concern. Elena's reply could have earned a standing ovation. "The only thing costing us everything is dealing with criminals who think private property is their piggy bank." I must have watched that recording a dozen times that night. Not just for the evidence, but for the fire in my wife's voice. Vivian thought she could break us. Instead, she just lit the match that would burn her empire down. Meanwhile, Rex's net around Commissioner Morse, Vivian's brother-in-law and the county commissioner, was tightening. Approvals stamped without site visits. Digital signatures backdated to greenlight her projects. His construction company pocketing no-bid contracts. It wasn't incompetence. It was racketeering. The Attorney General's office opened a formal investigation within days. But Vivian wasn't slowing down. She escalated into psychological warfare that would have made Cold War operatives proud. Anonymous flyers appeared on windshields, claims I was running an illegal business from home, false fire marshal complaints about hazardous materials in my garage. Even Child Protective Services showed up at our door over bogus reports of unsafe conditions. Elena had to take time off work to walk inspectors through our house, Sophia clutching her backpack while strangers poked through her room. The inspector apologized, but apologies don't erase humiliation. Vivian wasn't just playing dirty. She was playing with acid, hoping some would burn deep enough to scar. Sophia's college applications hit mysterious address verification issues that delayed her deadlines. The girl was pulling straight A's while dealing with harassment that would crush most adults. And still, she pressed on. Watching her resilience, I felt both pride and fury. Because intimidation is one thing, but dragging my daughter into it, that crossed a line. Then came the vandalism. Mailbox smashed at 3 a.m., landscaping poisoned until brown patches spelled move. Garden hoses cut, flooding the basement in 3 inches of mud. Orange paint splashed across our siding, visible from the subdivision entrance like a scarlet letter. Vivian wanted everyone to know exactly who the problem neighbor was. But vandalism is sloppy, and sloppy leaves trails. Marcus's cameras caught 2 board members with a baseball bat mid-swing at our mailbox, clear as daylight. Another clip showed teenagers in hoodies unloading jugs of herbicide from an SUV registered to Vivian's secretary. She thought she was invisible. In reality, she was documenting her own downfall for me. The community itself was splitting. At an emergency meeting to expel disruptive members, Dr. Hernandez demanded financial transparency. Marcus challenged the board's authority to fine for imaginary violations. Janet cornered the treasurer with questions about missing funds, leaving him stammering. 3 families formally withdrew from HOA membership that night. Others whispered about following. Vivian's iron grip was rusting, crumbling in her own hands. And law enforcement was finally paying attention. A sheriff's deputy filed an official report after witnessing our vandalized mailbox. He recognized some of Vivian's most loyal enforcers from prior domestic violence calls. That explained their comfort with intimidation. Saturday night, I stood on the porch with Elena, watching another so-called security patrol roll by. Their cigarette smoke drifted across our property like a mark of ownership. "She's going to try something bigger," Elena murmured, her hand slipping into mine. Her voice carried both fear and certainty. "Good," I said, eyes on the patrol car. "Let her dig deeper." Because Catherine's legal trap was nearly ready. Rex's evidence was bulletproof, and Marcus's footage was damning. Vivian thought she was unstoppable, but every desperate move she made, every flyer, every smear, every midnight construction stunt, they weren't weapons. They were nails. And she was building her own coffin. Everyone could feel it, the tension hanging over Willowbrook Commons like summer lightning. Vivian called it Community Action Day. Flyers plastered every mailbox, every lamppost. She promised unity, safety, beautification. But anyone with eyes could see it was a parade with one goal, to isolate us. Saturday morning, the crowd gathered. 50 people at least, some dragged along by obligation, others whipped into a frenzy by Vivian's charm and threats. She strutted at the front, pink suit pressed, clipboard in hand, sunglasses reflecting the cul-de-sac like a general surveying her troops. And right behind her, County Commissioner Morse, her brother-in-law. His presence was supposed to make it legitimate. Instead, it just made the corruption glow in daylight. They marched down our street with trash bags, rakes, even paint buckets. To the casual eye, it looked like a neighborhood cleanup. But their path told the truth. Straight to my driveway, straight to Alina's roses, straight to the survey stakes Vivian hated so much. I stood on the porch, arms crossed, cameras rolling. Alina beside me, Sophia clutching her phone, live-streaming every second to a private cloud server Marcus had set up. If Vivian wanted theater, we were going to sell tickets. She didn't disappoint. "Community property must be maintained," she shouted, waving her clipboard. Her voice rang sharp, amplified by the cluster of phones recording. She pointed to my survey stakes, her tone dripping authority. "Remove these obstructions immediately. They endanger children, create hazards, and violate our bylaws." Two board members stepped forward with bolt cutters. That was the moment. I raised my hand, calm, steady, the way I used to steady my crew before a dangerous lift. "Don't touch that stake," I said, my voice cutting through the noise. "This is private property, you are trespassing, and you are on camera." Vivian smirked. "No one is above the HOA. I almost laughed. "Tell that to the Attorney General." Her smirk faltered just slightly. Because right then, Catherine Silverman's paralegal served the papers, right in the middle of Vivian's parade. A stack so thick it landed in her hands with a slap that echoed across the pavement. Federal environmental complaint, quiet title action, racketeering allegations, evidence attachments thicker than a phone book. The silence lasted only a second, but it was delicious. Then the murmurs began. Neighbors craned their necks. Phones zoomed in on Vivian's trembling fingers flipping through the pages. Commissioner Morse's face drained color. He looked like he'd swallowed poison. And then the real fireworks. Marcus triggered the projector he'd mounted on his fence. A 40-foot display lit up against my garage door. Security footage rolled in high definition for the whole subdivision to see. Vivian's midnight construction stunt. Her board members smashing my mailbox. Teens unloading herbicide from a car tied to her secretary. Vivian herself offering Alina a bribe with stolen community funds. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Phones tilted upward to capture the evidence as it unfolded like a courtroom drama under the Texas sun. "Turn that off," Vivian shrieked, dropping the papers. She lunged toward the projector, but Marcus was faster, stepping between her and the fence with a calmness only Marines can muster. "Touch it," he said quietly, "and you'll add assault to the list." Her army crumbled in real time. Some slipped away, embarrassed. Others stood frozen, faces pale with betrayal. Janet stepped forward, waving a spreadsheet. "These are our dues," she shouted. "Where's the money, Vivian? Where did it all go?" Dr. Hernandez followed, holding her own folder. "You've been using shell companies, selling us out piece by piece." It wasn't just my voice anymore. The neighborhood was speaking, and once people find their voices, tyrants lose their power. Vivian tried one last card. "This is defamation, lies, staged footage," but her voice cracked, desperation bleeding through. And that's when the sheriff's cruiser rolled up. Two deputies stepped out, hands resting near their belts. They'd seen the footage, too. They'd received Rex's dossier, and they weren't here for me. The crowd parted as the deputies walked straight to Vivian. One read from a folded sheet. "Vivian Blackwell, you are under investigation for embezzlement, racketeering, and property fraud. You are advised to come with us for questioning." Her sunglasses slipped, revealing eyes wide with panic. She tried to rally her supporters, but they wouldn't meet her gaze. Commissioner Morse turned his back, phone pressed to his ear, already cutting ties. And just like that, Vivian's empire cracked. I stood on my porch, Alina's hand in mine, Sophia filming through tears that were equal parts relief and vindication. Because bullies always look 10 feet tall until the ground disappears beneath them. And Vivian? She'd spent so long building her tower of lies, she never noticed the foundation rotting away. As the deputies led her toward the cruiser, she twisted back, pointing at me. "This isn't over," she shouted. Maybe not, but for the first time in months, the road in front of my house was clear. And for the first time in years, it was mine. The morning after Vivian was escorted away, the neighborhood was quieter than it had been in months. No patrols, No fake violations taped to my door. No whispers slithering across lawns. Just the sound of wind through oak branches and the steady hum of cicadas. It should have felt like victory. Instead, it felt like recovery. Elena brewed coffee in silence, her hands lingering on the mug a little too long. Sophia sat at the kitchen table, scrolling her phone, eyes wide as messages poured in. Apologies, admissions, even offers of friendship from people who had looked the other way when Vivian's circus was in full swing. She read one out loud. "We're so sorry for what you went through. We should have stood with you sooner." Sophia shook her head. Where were they when it mattered? Her voice broke something in me, because she wasn't wrong. We'd been left alone in the fire until the blaze grew too big to ignore. And while Vivian was the villain, silence had been her greatest weapon. Later that day, Marcus stopped by with his dog, tail wagging like nothing had happened. He handed me a thumb drive. Every second of footage backed up in 3 places. They won't wriggle out of this one. Dr. Hernandez emailed her resignation from the HOA that afternoon. Janet organized a petition to dissolve the board entirely. Within 48 hours, nearly half the subdivision had signed. Vivian's empire hadn't just cracked, it was collapsing from within. But the real victory wasn't legal, it was personal. That weekend, Sophia opened her curtains again. I'll never forget the sight, her silhouette framed in sunlight, arms stretched as she let in the mockingbird's song she'd once loved. Elena planted new roses, her hands steady for the first time in months, and I stood on the porch watching the quiet road that had sparked it all. For the first time, it looked like what it was always meant to be, ours. Still, victory carries scars. The orange paint on our siding took days to scrub away. The poisoned patches of grass grew back unevenly. And trust, that will take longer. Neighbors wave now, smiles awkward, guilt hiding behind them. I return the gesture, but deep down I know some wounds never fully heal. And maybe that's the lesson. Because land is more than soil and asphalt. It's memory, it's safety. It's where children take their first steps and where families plant roots. When someone tries to steal that, they aren't just stealing property. They're stealing dignity. Vivian thought she could own people the way she owned deeds. She thought control was stronger than community. But in the end, it was community, the real kind, not the one written on HOA letterhead, that exposed her. Some nights I still hear the diesel engines of that midnight crew. I still see the smirk on Vivian's face when she believed she had us cornered. But I also see Elena's defiance as she recorded that bribe. Sophia's courage as she filmed the parade. Marcus's calm strength as he blocked Vivian from the projector. And it reminds me, dignity doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers, hold on one more day. The lawsuits are still ongoing. Vivian faces charges that could bury her in courtrooms for years. Commissioner Morse resigned in disgrace, his name scraped off county plaques. And the HOA? It's a hollow shell, drained of funds, credibility, and power. I drive down my road now without fear. Each bump reminds me of the fight it took to keep it. Each patch of asphalt is proof that standing your ground matters, even when the ground shakes beneath you. Sophia asked me the other night, was it worth it? I thought about the sleepless nights, the poisoned garden, the smashed mailbox. I thought about Elena's trembling hands, my daughter's tears, the isolation that felt like exile. Then I looked at her strong, resilient, more mature than any 15-year-old should have to be, and I said, yes, because some battles you don't pick, they pick you. And when they do, you fight so the next person doesn't have to. Silence followed, the kind of silence that feels like a sunrise, warm and full of promise. So I recently went through something most people would call a nightmare. But looking back, it wasn't just a fight over land. It was a fight for dignity, for family, for the right to stand on your own porch and know no one owns you. Vivian lost because she never understood that. And as I sit here tonight, the road outside bathed in the golden glow of streetlights I paid for, the air alive with mockingbirds and cicadas, I realize something simple. The HOA took my road without asking. So I vanished every one of their cars. And in the end, it wasn't revenge, it was justice. You've heard this confession, now wait until you hear the next one. The truth that shatters everything you thought you knew.